Hi everyone, welcome to the Green Room episode 14. I am here with my colleague Nick. Nick, how are you?
I'm very good, James.
Have you had a good week?
Yes.
Excellent.
Not too bad, not too bad. I can see you're donning the pink shirt today.
I'm donning the pink shirt. I've taken the leaf out of your book.
Thank you. It's probably 2 weeks in succession now that I haven't donned my pink shirt collection, but that's fine. That's fine. I'll leave it to someone else.
Are you looking forward to Easter?
Yes. Well, actually, when this recording comes out, we would have had Easter already, so...
Did you have a good Easter?
Yes.
Good. Did you get lots of Easter eggs?
Yes.
Excellent.
I've got some upstairs on my desk as well,
Excellent.
so thank you very much for that.
Good.
Really appreciate it.
No problem at all. I hope you enjoyed it. And we have Harry mic'd up as well.
Hello.
Eventually, we will actually get her on video. But anyway, at the moment.
I don't mind the mystery. I don't want to be mysterious.
People are liking that, but we're getting comments saying, "Oh, who's Harry?"
So the podcast is it's gaining a bit of traction. So we're getting some nice comments, which is great. Before we start, where can you find out about us, guys?
So what I always do when I'm lost with these things, I go onto the Green Age website. That's www.thegreenage.co.uk.
Yeah.
On the top, next to energy saving guides, there's a link to video blogs. I click on that, opens up another page, James. Then it gives me options of where I can download the podcast. One option is Apple iTunes.
Yeah.
Spotify.
So it's Apple Podcasts, in fact.
Apple Podcast. See, because I don't use Apple products, I'm very ignorant about those things. Spotify, TuneIn Radio. Sorry, I've said it wrong 2 weeks in a row. I'll get it right third time. And Stitcher, I think.
Yeah.
And then obviously YouTube, if you want to...
if you want to look at us,
yes.
if you want to enjoy it, I prefer YouTube because we're interactive with our viewers. So what are we covering today?
RHI, the Renewable Heat Incentive, just because we've had tons of questions on this, and Harry probably spends a lot of the time during the week backwards and forwards between people that are just kind of interested. I've got their questions and answers, and so I thought, we all thought together, why don't we just cover it and demystify some of the mysteries around another kind of key government policy.
Okay, fine. So do you want to give us a touch of background on the Renewable Heat Incentive? So
Renewable Heat Incentive was, the legislation came out at some point back in 2011. So lots of people were... So
this is when the Green Deal was launched.
Yeah, and lots of other things like feed-in tariff, I think, the year before that. So they were talking about the Renewable Heat Incentive. Mm-hmm. The essence of it being that, if I'm producing space heating or water through a low carbon or a carbon neutral or a renewable source, then I should get some sort of incentive
to do so.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So they thought of this policy back in 2011. It was only 2014 when this policy actually got delivered and in practice. And there was a lot of frustrated people by that because obviously, on the back of the announcement, as you can imagine, folks would have gone out there and had all sorts of things installed, but then it was another 3 and a bit years before they could see any benefits.
Okay. And it's mainly because the cost of installing the items that we're going to discuss is considerably more expensive than a standard, I can go to B&Q and buy a radiator that I plug into the wall for 25 quid. Yeah.
Well, let's give the comparison. So, for instance, if you are looking to get, a Valiant heat-only boiler, what it's going to cost you, £2,500.
Yeah.
And that's it pretty much, unless you're doing other bits and pieces on the radiators and thermostatic controls, etc. But say when you get to biomass, you can get really simple biomass boilers to really complicated ones.
Yeah.
So you're talking there at least £7,500 upwards.
Yes.
To £20,000.
Right. Yeah.
And then on the heat pumps themselves, before you've decided how the heat is going to be distributed, because it's through lower heat distribution rather than through classic radiators, you might want underfloor heating, all that stuff.
Yeah.
You're talking tens of thousands of pounds.
Yeah. And then the other two, what other technologies can I get?
So ground source air source, biomass, and solar thermal just for your hot water.
Okay.
So solar thermal with the tubes.
So solar thermal, it's not to be confused with solar PV. So solar thermal is producing hot water. Biomass is essentially replacing your boiler, but instead of using gas to power it, you're using little biomass chips. Yeah, so this is considered renewable. Heat pumps, air source, ground source, and water source. So we get lots of questions on water source. The government don't really cover it that well. Water source you can get the renewable heat incentive.
So we call it RHI.
Let's call the RHI, I like that. So you can get it with a water source heat pump. However, you just basically, all the regulation, all the requirements copy or they mirror the ground source heat pump. So as soon as if you've got a river at the end of your garden, for whatever.
So it's practicalities of installation. That's the difference between the two. That's how the government see it. So.
Yeah, exactly. So, right, we're going to make a start. First of all, let's go through the technologies very briefly, and just do a couple, I have to test you, a couple of reasons why you would and reasons why you wouldn't install these technologies.
Right, okay.
And then we can see if we can come up with a few.
Yes.
So let's start. So biomass boiler.
So biomass, as you've rightfully said, so if it's essentially the difference there is like your gas boiler or your LPG or your oil boiler, instead of using a fuel, the fuel happens to be recycled wood chippings that are in the form of pellets.
Yeah.
That would then get delivered to your property in big mass, and then what you would do is you would feed them into your biomass boiler, and then that would combust, produce lots of hot water. Some of that would be diverted through your central heating system, and the rest of it stored in buffer tanks for hot water usage for showers, etc. So it's like a classical system, but the fuel source is different.
Okay, what are the advantages of it?
Advantages of it are, for instance, if you are particularly large property somewhere out in I wouldn't say sticks, but very rural property, where you've got lots of access, and you've got, say, maybe a few outbuildings as well to heat. Yeah. So, for instance, I don't know, chicken farm or something like that. Yeah. I'm not necessarily saying that all people have biomass boilers have a chicken farm, but kind of a complex set of buildings, or just really large rural buildings where you can have the access, obviously then to store the wood chippings, etc., to have the physical size to feed and install the biomass boiler, then it would make a lot of sense. Yeah. But also, where the fuel source would be relatively cost effective, so it's easy for you to deliver it when you need it, essentially.
I think, and that basically, so while that is a pro, the downside to a biomass boiler is the fact, with gas, it comes through a pipe into my house and it goes straight into the boiler. I don't ever see it. With biomass, I'm having these pellets delivered and I have to feed them. If I don't feed them into my boiler, I know you can get hoppers, and so it can, the hoppers can potentially keep your boiler going for an extended period of time. But when that hopper runs out, I need to refill it. Yeah, so if you're going away for a couple of months, you've got to refill it. You've got to empty the boiler of all the ash from the biomass, etc., etc. And you need space to store it. Yes. Right? So it's not really feasible, as kind of you were alluding to, it's not really feasible to put one of these into a flat, for example. Yeah.
So in the cities, you will never get away with it.
Exactly. So that's kind of biomass.
I was just going to say, so we were on the BBC actually a couple of years ago, and they thought we'd be very positive. Yeah, so we were on.
We were on the watch show.
So on the BBC Radio Hereford and Worcester. And this was a couple of years ago, and we were just talking about.
Just because you don't remember, we were on the watch show.
And then so maybe Harry can link this interview back onto the podcast when it's live. But essentially just going through what you've just said, sort of pros and cons. But I sort of summarised it that actually it would only be certain instances where
it works.
Yeah,
it works. And so I think if someone approaches you and says your house is perfect for a biomass, take it with a large pinch of salt, because they will normally, there is a reason for them doing that. They are potentially either they're going to take your renewable heat incentive, your RHI payments, or there may be something more to it.
The other thing about biomass is that obviously it's got a lot of emissions associated with it.
Well, it's only, so it's, the reason it's renewable, I guess, is because it's locking the carbon in during plant growth, and then it releases
so it's carbon
it
neutral,
back out.
isn't it? Yeah. So it's not really,
but it depends where they're being grown, these wood chips, and it depends if they're cutting down swathes of forest to replace them with quick-growing trees and crops.
Exactly.
Okay, so solar thermal.
Solar thermal, we've done a podcast earlier. We've done a solar thermal versus solar PV. So it's one specifically where it produces hot water, so no electricity on this one, and it's useful where you've got a large roof space. You might potentially have solar PV there as well. Yeah. So if you're getting these technologies installed, you might want to do them in tandem, or you might want to do them when you're doing a piece of work on say on your roof space. Yeah. Or generally onto your heating, because it's not just easy to retrofit your existing heating system with solar thermal. You're going to have to do other bits and pieces.
I think that is the downside of solar thermal. Yeah, so if it's never going to be able to do everything, it's not going to be able to fulfil all of your hot water requirements for your heating, for your basically hot water. So, and it's only really working when the weather is sufficient to get the temperature to get water to a certain temperature.
So right now it's perfect because we're getting
it's starting now and it kind of ends in September, October. The problem is the colder months when actually you need heating and you tend to use more hot water. It's not really doing anything. So you're always going to have to couple it with, as you mentioned, a sort of another heating system, which means if you want to get it, if you want it to feed into a hot water tank, for example, you need a hot water tank that will take 2 heating sources. Yeah. So there's various complexities associated with solar thermal.
So I suppose that the advantage there over biomass, just as a kind of universal technology, is you're not limited to being rural, so you can have solar thermal installed in urban areas, but you just need to make sure that there's no shading or big trees that are going to
exactly. And I think you'd consider it if you're going to be replacing either your hot water tank specifically or your heating system at the same time. So if you're going to put a brand new shiny heating system in your house, you might do solar thermal at the same time.
Because those hot water tanks, they've got multiple chambers, haven't they? So
they've got dual feed, so you need lots of holes essentially going into it where the hot water can be forced in. So that's solar thermal. Heat pumps.
I'd like you to explain air source heat pump because I know that's your favourite technology.
So air source heat pumps.
With qualification.
So heat pumps are they're becoming really popular, and I think it's government are trying to push policy through where they're going to look to ban boilers, gas boilers.
Was it 2025? Something like that for new builds?
2025, yeah.
So,
they're trying to go.
Yeah, so if they're going to do that, then obviously heat pumps are going to become very popular, or more popular than they are. Now what they're doing is they're taking heat from the air, and there is always heat in the air.
So that's air source, yeah? So it's taking latent
I'm
heat.
doing air source specifically. So taking latent heat, and what they're doing is they compress it right down, and that drives the temperature right up. And then they basically take that heat from the compressed air into the water, and then that is pumped around your house.
So an inverted refrigerator, essentially.
Exactly. So, but it's a bit weird, that inverted refrigerator. Everyone talks about it, but you never really notice, because you don't notice that your fridge, on the outside your fridge is getting warmer.
Yes.
You just notice that inside your fridge is getting
it's always
cooler.
turned, it's either if you've got a fitted kitchen, you never see the back of it, or how often do you move the fridge?
Exactly, but if you had an enclosed heat pump, that heat pump room would get cooler and cooler and cooler, because it's stripping more and more heat from the air, and that would then push the heat into the house. The issue is that when the air is cooler and they are trying to take heat from cooler air, the heat pump needs to work harder. It uses more energy to drive the temperature up to where it was.
So we use heating, say, 6 months of the year.
And when it's cold.
Yes.
Yeah, so during the winter months, your efficiency of that heat pump, because heat pumps, the reason they're so popular is because in theory, they basically take 1 unit of electricity and change it to 3 or 4 units of useful heat. And during the summer, 100% that rings true with air source heat pumps. It can be even higher than that. The problem is during the winter, when they're trying to take it, if it's bloody freezing outside, and you're trying to get heat from that, the heat pump needs to work really hard, i.e. use lots of electricity to drive that temperature up. The other issue, and it's not really an issue, but the hot water that tends to come out of a heat pump, so if your radiator, your heating system, tends to be at a lower temperature. If you want to take it to a higher temperature, you can, but you need to use more electricity to get it there, right? So you tend to set it at a reasonable level where the temperature in your heating system is lower than compared to a traditional heating system, like a gas heating system. And so what that means is you need bigger radiators to compensate.
Yeah.
Or, as you mentioned earlier, something like underfloor heating.
Which you wouldn't do to the rest of your house, just from practicality purposes. You probably do to the area that you spend most of your time downstairs, which would be your dining kitchen.
And I think a lot of people see these numbers, and I think a lot of installers and a lot of manufacturers will band around figures on air source heat pumps saying, there's 2 ones, really. They use coefficient performance and the seasonal performance factor, SPF. Right, the coefficient performance is at any one moment in time how efficient your heat pump is. Right, so during the summer it might be 4.5. right? So what that's basically saying is it's taking 1 unit of electricity and it produces 4.5 units of useful heat. During the winter, that drops. This coefficient performance drops. So it might be like 1.5 or 2.
Mm-hmm.
So 1 unit of electricity is producing 2 units of useful heat. That makes it very, very expensive to run the heat pump in the winter. But the the manufacturers will blend this rate into a season performance factor. So they will give you an overall figure, which is, say, 2.5 or 2.7 for an air source heat pump. But when you actually use the heat pump most of the time to produce the hot water...
I think the COP is the average of the SPF. Basically, SPF is at each, because it's seasonal performance factor.
I thought seasonal performance factor was the overall one.
And then the coefficient of performance is the blended one.
Okay.
I think, we can...
Anyway, we can check that one. But what it means is that over the course of a year, with an air source heat pump, the efficiency changes massively. So that is my issue with the heat pump, because in the winter, when you need the when you need the hot water, it requires more electricity to produce.
What are the other issues with air source heat pumps?
Space, noise. We get loads of comments on noise
from neighbours.
So you're getting this thing installed on the outside of your house, and they make noise because they have a compressor.
They are, but they are. It's not like a how do I say? It's not like a tractor turbine or
no, exactly. It's not like an air raid siren or something like that. I mean, it's not loud.
I've stood next. I've stood next to one, and I can barely notice it. But then some people.
But I think one of the issues is the firing up noise. So if you're like used to complete silence, and then suddenly it fires up, you've got that complete silence to noise, and then it'll turn off 2 minutes later, and then it'll come back on and turn off. You know what I mean? And so it's those kind of changes in noise. Yeah. Rather than if it just sat at noise, you get used to it.
The thing is, I've got planes coming over my house and police sirens most of the time.
Where do you live?
Quite an urban area, or ambulances and stuff like that. So I guess, if you're, as you
not used to it,
you're going to find that a bit weird.
So that's an air source heat pump. Ground source heat pump and water source heat pumps. So we'll do ground source heat pumps. They work a lot better because as soon as you go under the ground, but they work on the same principle, but you're taking heat from the ground rather than the air. As soon as you go a little depth down into the ground, the temperature is very stable. So even in the middle of winter, if you're 2 meters down, the temperature is pretty much consistent. Even middle of the summer, middle of the winter, it doesn't matter. So therefore, the coefficient performance, season performance factor, is relatively level during the year. There might be minor sort of changes, but it means that your 1 unit of electricity is producing the 4 units of useful heat.
And normally it's quite a big undertaking because I've seen these things being installed, and there's a lot of preparation work
for the ground
for the boreholing.
So you can do it. So it can either go vertically, and you're looking. So we worked with a company recently, and they put one in. They would put 2 boreholes in, 123 meters deep. Right, so it's quite a lot. So basically, the water gets pumped down 123 meters, goes in a little loop, it comes back up, and during that time, it's kind of absorbing warmth from the ground, and then it comes out marginally hotter, and then they compress that and get heat. That's very deep. It's not something you're going to be able to do in London potentially, because you'll just go into the tube line or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Or
one of the World War II kind of dungeons, or secret kind of.
But you can if you're sort of in farmland and whatever, you can get a ground source heat pump and you can put it horizontally in the ground, so you can just dig a trench.
And I think it actually potentially works very well for multiple dwellings on new developments.
Yes. Yeah. When you're in a new town, for example, it's not a bad idea. They're expensive because of the kind of either the drilling down or the area of land to lay the pipe down. However, because they're more expensive, what the government has done is they've structured the RHI in such a way that you get a higher payment for a ground source heat pump over an air source
compensate you
to compensate for the additional outlay.
Okay.
Water source heat pump, same kind of thing. You're taking heat from latent water. There is always heat in water unless it's 27 minus 273 or something, absolute zero. I think.
Yeah.
And so it works exactly the same principle. And you're getting the same kind of, you're getting the same RHI for a water source heat pump as you would for a ground source heat pump.
Okay. So that's
they're the
technologies.
Techs. Right.
Do you want to talk about formats of the RHI?
Okay.
So basically, it came in 2014.
Yeah.
And then from there, the policy was, so if you had, actually I need to correct myself, so actually if you had a technology installed from 2009, then
you could still claim
folks
it, they could backwork it.
Backworked it. And essentially it's when you've had that approved and stamped, you would essentially get quarterly payments from your electricity supplier back into your account for a period of 7 years.
Yeah.
And then, because obviously with the knowledge that after 7 years that will go towards some of the upfront costs that you've had to incur.
Yeah.
And what they've done since obviously introduction 2014, they've digressed it slightly. So I know on biomass that went down significantly, but I think on the air source
they've stayed pretty consistent.
Yeah.
To be honest, the rates. They've gone up actually because of
ground source has gone up because of the take up has been low because of the obviously the cost.
So trying to encourage it. I think first things first. I think talking about people who already have the RHI, I don't think we need to worry about it too much. But basically, it's all based on your EPC. So we've got an EPC here. I've got loads of paper today. Right, EPC
Very well
here.
prepared.
Thanks very much. Now on page, and the EPCs all look the same. So on page 2 of the EPC, you have a little section called Your Home's Heat Demand. Right, and this is what for heat pumps and for biomass.
Yeah.
This is the numbers they use to calculate it. So before I do anything, before I install anything, I know what my payments are going to be for the next 7 years. Right, which is quite a nice way to do it. So you can actually suddenly work out exactly how much you're going to be, how much you're going to get paid, how much it's going to cost as an initial outlay, if it's worth it.
So in terms of the things that might go against you claiming straight away, so loft, it's worth to point out loft and cavity wall insulation.
So you have to have an EPC that is done within the last 2 years, right? If your EPC comes back and suggests, because they have loads of recommendations, if your EPC suggests either loft insulation or cavity wall insulation, you get those done first and then get a new EPC. And as soon as they disappear off the EPC, I'm ready then to start my RHI mission.
So if you've got a solid brick house, then even if you have solid wall insulation come up as a recommendation,
you don't have to do it
because it's a fairly expensive measure.
Exactly, and previously, to 2017, we'll touch on this in a sec, a lot of people, there was no limit on the payments, essentially. The higher the heat demand on the EPC, was the higher your payment.
So I could have an attached house, 7 bedrooms in the countryside, solid brick,
and you could
payments.
Comfortably get paid 50 grand, 60 grand over 7 years. So, and so the payments were ridiculous. For these kind of technologies. What's happened is in 2017 the government basically bought in maximum payments they would give you, so they limited the home's heat demand. So even if your heat demand on your home was like 50,000 kilowatt hours, the government said, right, these are the numbers, this is the maximum we will pay you for a particular technology.
That makes sense.
So should we go through one by one?
Well, so you're going to go over what the cap rates are,
Okay,
first.
so basically what we're going to do, so start with biomass, so the rate for biomass is what? You've got it somewhere.
I've got it here, no problem whatsoever. It is, it is 6.74 pence per kilowatt hour.
6.74 pence.
Yes.
Okay, so what we do there, right, is we go into my EPC, right, so I'll take my EPC, sorry if you're listening because you're going to hear me wobbling bits of paper around. I then look at the heat demand on my EPC, right, and provided my biomass boiler is doing both my space heating, i.e. my radiators, and my hot water,
yes,
I add the two numbers together under existing dwelling, add those two numbers together.
Yes.
So on a house, the house I've got here, we're looking at about 15,000 kilowatt hours per year, right? If I times that 15,000 kilowatt hours, by the number you just told me, which was what?
6.74 pence. So
6.74. I get £1,000 a year. Yeah, £1,011 a year times 7. You're looking at £7,000, right? So for my biomass boiler in that size property, I'm going to get £7,000 payment over 7 years. I'm literally taking £1,000 a year.
So it'll make a dent, essentially, a significant chunk of the install cost, but it won't.
Yes, it's not going to cover the whole lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, if the heat demand of that property is bigger, that's great. What the government has said is that there is now maximums. So on a biomass boiler, if you're thinking of getting a biomass boiler, the government will max it out that your heat demand is 25,000.
And what can they potentially receive there?
So if your house did have a heat demand of 25,000 kilowatt hours, so basically I've looked at my EPC and I've added the two numbers together, the space heating and the water heating, it comes to 28,000. The government is saying, sorry pal, can't do that. The
25.
maximum you're allowed for biomass is 25,000. So you take your 25,000 times 0.0674, 1685 per year, £1,685 per year, right?
Okay.
Times 7, £11,795, right? For that particular technology,
It's not bad.
which basically covers it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that covers the cost of your biomass boiler. Depends obviously how big the house is, what size you need, but it's got you a lot closer. Now, bigger houses are going to need bigger bigger biomass boilers. So unfortunately, if you've got a really big house now, previous to 2017 wasn't an issue because it wasn't limited. But if you've got a really big house, it might be that actually this doesn't work financially.
Yeah.
Because the biomass boiler you need is so much bigger.
You're still going to have the savings though, from your bills.
In terms of what? In terms of the fact that you're using biomass pellets?
Yeah.
It depends what fuel they were. It depends on the cost of the biomass pellets.
True.
Potentially.
I'll give you that.
If the cost of the pellets were stable, but then the oil price went up, so if you're using an oil boiler, then that might be a consideration, or if in relation to electricity.
Can one of you have a quick look at the price per kilowatt hour of biomass pellets? So then we can see.
Get Harry to do it. So then.
And in the meantime, right? So that's biomass.
Yep.
Kind of happy?
Yes.
So the maximum I'm ever going to get is just shy of £12,000. Remember, that's paid over 7 years. It's not paid all to you up front. It's paid every quarter you get. Basically, sorry, you're going to get about 250 quid. Nice to have, but you need to find the money up front. So that's the issue with it. Sorry.
And that's with all the technology.
Talking a lot today.
So you've got the figures here nicely for the heat pump. So the difference then, if you were to calculate these figures for the air source and the ground source, it works on what you were saying, the adjusted SPF, so the season performance factor, and essentially what it is just a fraction. So they take, so the manufacturer, say if it's a Ecodan Mitsubishi, not Ecodan Mitsubishi, I think it's Ecodan Mitsubishi, but like a Dimplex or a Ecodan or whatever. So the manufacturer would then give you the calculated coefficient of performance.
The MTS installer will give you that number, right?
So
they will give you this SPF thing, right?
And then,
which is basically the efficiency of your particular heat pump.
So that fraction will go into the tariff rate and whatever your heat demand is for the property, and that would work out a figure of what you would be expected to get paid.
The heat pumps are marginally different because they require electricity to run.
Yes.
Yeah, so the calculation is a bit different, but basically what it's saying is, right, if my heat demand is 25,000 kilowatt hours, it will then work out the renewable part of that.
Yes.
Right, so it will remove the part of just the electricity running the machine, and it will pay you based on that.
So if I had a significantly large property, so say my heat demand was over 25,000, the government have said, what you've rightfully said, that no, unfortunately we're capping the air source heat pump to 20,000 kilowatt hours.
Yeah.
So based on 20,000 kilowatt hours, and we've taken an example of an MCS certificate and what the SPF was of 2.7, you're expected over the 7 years to get a total payment of £9,252.
Okay, so you're looking about, what's that, 9252 divided by 7, you're looking at about 1,300 quid a year.
Divided by 4.
You're looking at about £330 every quarter.
which is it's not bad. And then if we move on to the ground source, because obviously ground source is a more expensive measure.
But more expensive, but more efficient. Yeah.
So what they've said, but also to incentivise it, the government has said, well, actually, we're going to cap this at 30,000, so 10,000 kilowatt hours more than air source heat pump.
Mm-hmm.
So if your heating demand is 30,000 or more, capping at 30,000, you're expected to get a total amount of payments, and we've taken again an example of a MCS certificate which gave this particular heat pump 3.7 SPF or COP. The maximum amount you would ever get expected to pay is £31,365.
Which works out at £4,500 a year, which is about £1,120 a quarter. So actually, ground source, if you have a house and you can put in boreholes, the boreholes might take the cost of the heat pump up to could cost £20,000 to put in a ground source heat pump with boreholes. If you're looking at sort of £10,000, £11,000 boreholes, the ground source heat pump might cost 20k, but you're getting substantially more than that from the government. So that is how heat pumps work. So heat pumps is a bit more complicated because we have to remove the element of how it requires electricity to run, right? So it's not all renewable.
And just important to say, these maximum payments again were based on we took an arbitrary figure.
No, exactly. So yours are going to vary slightly, but we can basically calculate, and we've got blogs on this and stuff on the website that will show you how exactly to calculate what you're going to make, and we are going to improve that section of the website as well. We're going to do it for each individual tech. Right. Solar thermal.
Oh, Rampton, solar thermal.
Go on.
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
No, that's fine. I thought we'd
solar thermal's a bit different. So what they are doing, so when you get an MCS, because everything, to get the Renewable Heat Incentive, you need to install an MCS approved renewable heat technology.
Microgeneration certification scheme.
Yeah, but your installer needs to be certified with that, and the technology itself needs to be certified with that. They will give you a certificate, and that will have an estimated annual generation figure on it. And so that is just simply times by the tariff. Yeah, so on a
tariff is
solar thermal, it's about
20.66 pence.
So on a solar thermal
per kilowatt hour.
You might get
hot water.
Here we've got 400 quid a year.
Yeah.
On an average system.
Yeah. Maybe
so
a bit less.
400 times 7. It's not a massive number. No. It's 2,800.
And just bear in mind that for, as you earlier said, to get a system working to be able to accept the feed from a solar thermal system, you need the right plumbing system in place, the right hot water tank with.
And it's unlikely that this is going to cover the cost.
Yeah, and you need the installer to get up onto the roof and somehow install the panels in the first place.
Yeah,
it's quite a bit of upfront cost there.
Are we going to mention, or is it a bit naughty on how you maximise your payments?
Probably a bit naughty, isn't it?
Just do it anyway.
Go on.
Well, okay, fine. So if I'm considering getting the renewable heat incentive, and I want to get it for a heat pump, or I want to get it for biomass or whatever, ideally, and this is a bit naughty, but ideally the heat demand on my EPC is as big as possible. It will obviously be capped to what these government have capped it at. But you want it as close as possible to that cap.
Yes.
Yeah. So it says obviously that I need to do external wall. I was going
to say these are legitimate ways to.
Yes, no, this isn't actually naughty. I mean, this is just, if you know how it works, this is what you can do. So I know that I need to get cavity wall insulation and loft insulation. I don't, when you get this installed, your installer will probably recommend, for example, if you have a solid wall property, because it's all working at lower temperatures, you get external wall insulation. First thing, you want to get your RHI based on that before you do any works. So all I'm looking for is this, my EPC, not to say cavity or loft insulation. Then get my RHI calculated on this, and then do the other works after. If you have loft insulation, so if I were to put loft insulation on my roof now, I would probably put 200 mil? It doesn't hit building rates. I'm going to die again of coughing.
No way. So So 150, 200 would then not have loft insulation as a recommended measure on your EPC if you get to that level.
So, but all you actually need to do is just take it. You just need to remove it, right? So you just need enough loft insulation for it not to be a recommendation, which is about 100 mil. Because it's not going to recommend
something like that. I think it depends on roof space in relation to the absolute.
But what you're trying to do is maximise heat demand.
Yeah.
In your property, and therefore, basically get your RHI based on that EPC.
Sorry, Harry. How I was just going to say, in terms of take up over time, you showed us that graph, or did you have a graph?
I don't have a graph.
I did. I've got it in front of me.
So what's the take up been of each? Which one have gone down or up over time?
So biomass was getting more popular for a while until about 2015. It's kind of leveled out now. So
and that's because there was a massive drop in the RHI tariff.
Right, exactly.
At that time.
So
biomass.
People are kind of consistent with that. In terms of ground source heat pumps and solar thermal, that's kind of uptake has gone up slightly over time, kind of consistently. The big one is air source heat pumps. The curve on that is massive. Loads of people are taking that up more and more every year. It's now way outstripping the others in terms of how many people are getting air source heat pumps.
So I should maybe not be so rude about them.
No, you can still be rude about them. That's fine.
Okay. But that is the RHI in a nutshell.
And we had, I was just going to say, we had a gentleman email us in earlier this week or last week, and he's looking to kind of do a significant piece of work somewhere in a rural part of the world, and he wasn't very happy with some of our options that we gave in our electricity podcast, electric heating podcast. And he's kind of set down going the air source heat pump route. So I'm hoping that what we've said there is given him enough food for thought.
Yes, listen. Electric heating, just because the cost of electricity is about 3 or 4 times out of gas, anything that requires electricity to run is going to be more expensive than a gas boiler. Obviously, if you've got something that's sort of 400% efficient, i.e. 1 unit of electricity, 4 units of useful heat, like a ground source heat pump.
So I'd say, if the gentleman has the money up front,
to gas boiler.
He should go the ground source heat pump route for the efficiency rather than the air source.
I think that guy said that he was going to go with an air source heat pump, and he said that if he had the money, he would have gone with a solar option as well for the electricity for the air source heat pump. But I think the initial outlay was
again, you have a small issue in that I use my heating in the winter when if you look at solar PV, so i.e. the solar that produces electricity, and you look at the generation graph, during the winter it just falls off a cliff.
It still works. It works on daylight as opposed to
where it's going to make slight sense is where if we go to full time of use tariffs with a lot of storage capability in each house. Then what you could always do, and with amazing insulation in the property. Yeah. So this particular individual's gone out to work for the rest of the day. During the day when demand for electricity for domestic use is low and so hopefully you see the price drop, that's when you heat the property and you store it within the fabric. Yeah. And then you come home and it's nice and warm. Then it sort of begins to work a bit better than I'd say the kind of the solar PV option.
It does, and I think this is all good and well for new properties, but in the UK we have really old buildings, right? This is the issue. So all of our buildings are really, really old, and therefore these solutions and talking about things like time of use tariff, they just don't work. If that house was retrofitted with loads of insulation to an inch of its life and brought up to kind of modern day standards, 100%, I'm kind of completely buy into that. But at the moment, we've got 8 million, 9 million properties, solid wall properties that don't have any insulation on the walls. And so you're seeing massive heat loss. And it's just because we have really old housing stock.
Yes.
So it becomes a challenge. It does become a challenge.
But I suppose, as we mentioned again, it's through regulation, people will be eventually forced to take it up. And the easiest way, I suppose, is on new builds.
It is, but it's still, I question that they're going to ban gas boilers. However, we're going to have loads of gas power stations that are producing electricity from gas.
Yes.
That are then used in
So you're unhappy about that principle, I can understand.
But That's just a hang-up that I have, and I will repeat many times, I'm sure, over the coming months.
In the news, well, so would you say then the biggest criticism of the whole RHI is it's a subsidy for the people with a bit of disposable income in their pocket?
Because if you we spoke to DEC before they changed names, so the department and government that were in charge of all this sort of thing, and it was really interesting speaking to the fellow who came up with the RHI, because his brief was to encourage uptake of renewable energy sources. It wasn't to help those in kind of fuel poverty. It was literally, you need to hit a number, as in you need this many people to install these technologies. And so the easiest way there is to target people who have money. Because if they can get money back and they've got a more efficient system, then they're going to do it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't help. It doesn't help people who are in fuel poverty or any of that sort of
But
stuff.
I was just going to question, do they amend it for social housing landlords?
Yeah, there's a whole kind of different set of rules about social housing and stuff. We'll put a link to an article about that, because it's slightly different.
But he was embarrassed. The fellow who set this
He should
up.
be.
And
It's
I'm not gonna
embarrassing.
name check him, but he was embarrassed about how this was set up. And he just basically, but it fulfilled everything it needed to fulfill. It fulfilled his brief. It just didn't do anything for people.
And it's just important to say as well, so on the biomass, because the uptake was so phenomenal at the beginning, it actually, the combustion of pellets releases 66% more CO2 emissions than gas.
But they absorb it.
But,
right?
but
So
it's
when
neutral,
it's
yeah.
carbon neutral.
I understand, yep.
But I agree.
But at that point in time,
yeah.
when it's releasing, it's more
Agreed.
CO2.
It's carbon neutral. However, you've got to transport the pellets from wherever they're made to the place they're being burnt.
Yeah.
So it's not as carbon neutral as potentially.
And with the pellets, the nice pellets, the good ones that don't release as much rubbish, are more expensive than the kind of just wood chippy ones, which are about half the cost. So that's
So all in all, I get the feeling in this room that the RHI doesn't really tick a huge number of boxes for us in terms of what it's trying to achieve.
So I was just going to say, what we've spent. So most of this podcast has been on domestic RHI, so it's important to have it, because we won't spend too much time on commercial, but it's just important thing to say commercial has its own rules and regulations. And just a couple of facts before we wrap it up. So instead of 7-year payments, companies can claim 20-year payments.
Yeah.
And what the evidence has shown so far, the biggest uptake of that has been biomass. Yeah. Again, which I guess is kind of those farms, I suppose. Yeah. So we've got rural businesses, which at those point,
and then they were paid. I won't go to
a phenomenal amount, yeah.
But they were paid a phenomenal amount, and they were encouraged to just, if the more they run their heating systems, the more they got paid.
Oh, that was in Northern Ireland. That was really bad. So they didn't make any adjustments
for digression.
They didn't have the digression, which is the adjustments to the rates, and basically the cost of the fuel was less than basically they were getting paid for leaving their heating on.
Yes.
So you'd have all the windows open and the heating on all night with nobody in there, and people made a massive amount of money. It cost the Northern Ireland government, they think it was about £700 million, which obviously now is getting paid by the good people who did not benefit at all. Yes. And actually, some people are still getting these crazy rates and still profiting from it.
Yeah, of course they are.
Because it was contracted for 20 years or 7 years,
It's a tricky situation. Anyway, have we got any news this week?
Just one thing that stood out, I guess is all over the energy news, but so Sainsbury's Energy is stopping taking new customers on its energy tariffs, and all those customers are being moved to British Gas.
But was Sainsbury's Energy tariff not just a British Gas?
I think so. It was a white label of.
So all they've done is remove their
Sainsbury's brand.
Fine. Okay.
So it's a marketing switch.
Fine. Okay. Concentrate on what you know. I think that's what Sainsbury's message is. Anyway, guys, anything else from anyone?
I think
that's it.
That's it. Yeah.
So hopefully that has explained the RHI in a bit of detail. I apologise because it was a bit numbery. It was always going to be, so I'm sorry for that. If you want to hear, I'm just going to really quickly remind you, if you want to listen to our podcast, you can go to Spotify, you can go to TuneIn Radio, you can go to Apple Podcast, you can go to Stitcher. All the best way is to go to our website, and that has all the links there. There's a button at the top that says podcast. Or if you want to watch us, you can go to YouTube. And that is it from me.
See you soon.
Cheers.
Bye.